So our goal, for the most part, he's got a few for this lesson, but really I'd like to focus on considering the impact of servant leadership in our world today. So we'll try and stay with that versus some of the other smaller stuff. Before we begin, and I won't ask anybody to answer this, but just as we're going, think about, just for yourselves, maybe a time when you might have denied Jesus, like it just maybe felt safer not to say what you thought. And whether, or whether you've ever deserted somebody in need. So we're going to try and put ourselves in that kind of position where Peter, I always refer to it, I think I've told you, as that unfortunate poultry incident where he denies Peter 3 times, and the cock crows. So just if there's ever been a time like that, or you missed a time where you could have witnessed or served Christ and didn't. So just keep that in the back of your mind, because we'll move into that servant leadership. I'll open with prayer, and then we'll watch the video, which is long. So we'll get going. All right. Loving and forgiving God, we come before you with repentant and thankful hearts. We know that we are like your disciple, Simon Peter, both flawed and faithful. Forgive us for the times we turn away from you, the times we deny you, the times we fail to serve others in your name. Thank you for your never-ending love and your grace-filled forgiveness. We look to you for courage and strength, for guidance and direction, as we continue to be your faithful but flawed disciples. Amen. Okay, so let's just go right into the video. Let me get it up here. Optimize. Can we all see?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. I'll make it bigger and we'll start.
Today, we're traveling to Jerusalem, and there we'll remember the events of the final hours of Jesus' life, from the Last Supper to the Garden of Gethsemane, and finally to the high priest's house where Peter denies knowing Jesus. Here we'll see in Peter's story a bit of our own story. So, let's go to Jerusalem.
All right, hold on. Haven't had this problem. Has anybody had problems before?
Hours of Jesus' life. Here we'll see in Peter. So we've come to one of the locations where people remember the events that took place at the Last Supper, the upper room. There are several different locations that Christians have identified as possibilities for this. None of the buildings exist to this day, of course, but the place we're about to go into is it's where most people come to remember the Last Supper. So let's go to the upper room, probably built in the 1100s, maybe as late as the 1300s, and let's remember what happened when Jesus met with his disciples for the Last Supper. Let's go inside. So this is one possible location for the upper room. Jesus gathered with his disciples, and he transformed the Passover Seder meal into Holy Communion, or the Eucharist. And breaking the bread, he said, "This is my body." Taking the cup, "This is my blood of the new covenant." And this was his way of expressing both the covenant he was making with us and his saving work. And he gives them 3 commandments that night. We call this Maundy Thursday, 3 mandates. Love one another, serve one another, and remember me. After the supper was over, Jesus turned to Simon Peter in particular, and he said, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you." And then he says, "I pray that you wouldn't falter." But he implies that Simon would falter, and he says, and then when you turn back, he says, "strengthen your brothers." Simon Peter says, Lord, I would go anywhere with you. I would go to prison with you. I would die for you. And Jesus turns to him and says, Simon, tonight, before the cock crows, you'll deny knowing me 3 times. So we remember that part of the story in this place and so much more in the upper room. But I want to take you to one of the other locations for the upper room, and we're going to remember the rest of the story there. So let's go. So I'm excited to come here. This is the St. Mark's Convent and Church. It's the location, the Syrian Orthodox Church believes, the location of the upper room. It was first St. Mark's house and his mother's house, and it was there that the scripture tells us in the book of Acts that the early church gathered. It's thought that it was in their home that the disciples came for the experience of the Last Supper at the upper room, and where the early Christians met on the day of Pentecost. And so I want you to have a chance to see this place. I've never seen it myself, so I'm kind of excited to see it. And we're going to remember one more episode from the Last Supper. Let's go inside. The Syriac Orthodox Church believes this is the actual location of the upper room. This church built on top of it. I want to take you downstairs where we'll remember one more story from the Last Supper, captured in the painting behind me of the washing of the disciples' feet. Let's go downstairs and remember this story. So we've come to the lower level of the Church of the Virgin Mary at St. Mark's Convent in Jerusalem. And this room once went far beyond this wall. There's another part of the room beyond this wall. It is believed by the Syrian Orthodox Church that this is actually the upper room. And I want to remind you, we've considered the story of the Last Supper at the alternative site for the upper room. I want to remind you here of a second story. Jesus has just finished serving the supper, the meal, and he hears the disciples arguing with one another. What are they arguing about? Which one of us is the greatest? They still don't understand, after the Last Supper, that Jesus is going to die the next day. Which one of us is the greatest? After 3 years with Jesus in public ministry, they still don't understand which one of us is the greatest. And so Jesus says this, listen, the kings of this earth lord it over their subjects, but it's not going to be that way with you. The truly great among you will be your servants. In John's Gospel, he illustrates this in a profound way. As you may recall, there was water that was used to wash people's feet as they entered into a house. They took off their shoes, they washed their feet. The disciples entered this room, the upper room. There was a basin of water there and a towel. No one washed their feet. Why? I think it was because each one thought, if I stop and wash my feet, Jesus is going to expect me to wash one of my brother's feet. And they wanted no part of that. And so each one walked past the basin. Jesus gets up from the table. Remember, they're debating which one's the greatest. No one wants to be the servant. Jesus gets up from the table, and he goes and he picks up the basin of water, and he brings it to the disciples, and one by one he begins to wash their feet. He takes the water, washing their feet. They're horrified. I mean, this is not the way it should be. Jesus is our master, and he's washing our feet, but no one says a word until Jesus comes to Simon Peter. And Simon Peter speaks up, and he says, no, Lord, you will not wash my feet. And Jesus says, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part of me. And so Simon Peter says, well, then my head and my hands too, Lord. And Jesus says, no, your feet, that's enough. And then when he's finished washing each of the disciples' feet, Peter's and the other disciples' feet, Jesus turns to them and says, do you understand what I've done for you? You call me your master, you call me your teacher and your master, and that is what I am. And I have washed your feet. I played the role of the servant to wash your feet. If I have washed your feet, how much more should you wash one another's feet? And in this moment, he's teaching them something profound. Just before that story, John says he now showed them the full extent of his love by serving them. And of course, this was just a picture of what he'd do on the cross the next day, as he would serve the human race by laying down his life for them, and what he calls us to be and to do, which is precisely what Peter finally understood after the crucifixion and the resurrection. After the supper was over, Jesus led the disciples through the Kidron Valley to the Garden of Gethsemane. Let's go there now. So this is the grove of olive trees called the Garden of Gethsemane. You'll notice that some of the trees are very, very old. Some believe they're as old as 2,000 years. And Jesus brought his disciples here, had some of them remain in a vicinity around here, and he took Peter, James, and John further into the garden. And then from there, he said, you stay and wait and pray here. And he went a stone's throw beyond that to where the church, or the Basilica of Christ's Agony, the Church of All Nations is. We're going to go inside there and take a look. But I wanted you to see this beautiful grove of olive trees and imagine the events happening here where the disciples are praying in this garden where Jesus has come to agonize before he's arrested. Let's go inside the church. It's architecturally designed so that you feel like you're walking into the event that this building commemorates. You're walking into the Garden of Gethsemane, literally in that place, and you are commemorating, you're remembering, and really stepping back 2,000 years in time to that night. If you look up into the ceiling, you'll see the columns are trees, and they branch out into branches in the ceiling. You'll see the stars that are there from that night, so you're going back to that night. So you'll notice that the church is built on this rock outcropping. So throughout the room you can see in the foundations, you can see the rock here and here. And of course on every side, this church was built on top of this holy shrine. So the rock itself, the place where Jesus came to pray, the traditional location of that is the holy site, the place where once more in his agony Christ prayed, not my will but thy will be done. Let's go back outside to the garden and let's remember what happened when Jesus prayed 3 times here and 3 times returned to the garden. So Jesus returns from the place where he was praying and he finds Peter, along with James and John, fast asleep. He wakens him and says, couldn't you wait with me for 1 hour, keeping watch? He goes to pray again. He comes back once more and he finds them asleep. One more time, he goes back to pray. He comes back from his prayer of agony and he finds them asleep. And he says to them this. So we find Peter sleeping 3 times here in this garden. But Jesus shows grace once more. He says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I realize that your heart wants to be awake, and I understand you're very tired. And at that moment, Judas Iscariot comes with a guard. He kisses Jesus, betraying him with a kiss. Simon Peter, what does he do? He takes out his sword, and he's ready to fight. And he slashes the ear of the high priest's servant. And as he slashes the ear of the high priest's servant, Jesus stops and says, listen, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. You've heard this phrase before. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And Jesus then takes the man's ear and heals him. And at that, the disciples flee. They leave in terror. Peter starts to fight, and then at that moment, he runs away in fear. I want you to recognize something once more about Peter. He falls asleep, and yet Jesus shows him grace. 3 times he falls asleep, Jesus shows him grace. I want you to notice that he's the only one who took out a sword to fight. None of the others did. Peter takes out a sword to fight. But once Jesus says, no, we're not going to fight, Peter, along with the other disciples, all flee. They all desert Jesus, just as Jesus had foretold. Now, as Jesus is arrested, the guard takes him to the Kidron Valley, through the Kidron Valley, to the high priest's house. Let's walk through the Kidron Valley together now. Let's go. So we've come through the Kidron Valley, Jesus arrested, being taken in chains, to the house of the high priest, where the Sanhedrin will gather for the trial by night. It's in the middle of the night, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. The disciples have fled, except Peter and John, who are following in the darkness in the distance, following Jesus as he's going to the place of his trial. When I come through this in the Kidron Valley, I love these tombs that are here in the background. These are very ancient tombs. And in my mind, of course, people have been buried here on the Mount of Olives for a very long time. As those tombs were there, I imagine Jesus walking through here. And in my mind, I think the one who is the resurrection and the life is walking through this place. I wonder if the bones weren't rattling inside those tombs when Christ walked through here, as he ascends these stairs and makes his way for his trial before Caiaphas and the Jewish ruling council. Let's continue on our way. Christians come to these steps when they're retracing the journey of Jesus in the last 24 hours of his life These steps are believed to be from the Roman period, from the time of Christ. And you can see them going on downhill and onto the Kidron Valley. So this would have been the path that was taken from the Kidron Valley to the high priest's house, Caiaphas' house, where Jesus was brought by trial that night to be tried before the Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin. Christians will often take off their shoes and walk barefoot on these steps, imagining that they are actually touching the stones that Jesus himself walked on that terrible night. But it wasn't, of course, only Jesus who walked on these steps. Simon Peter and John were hiding in the distance. They were following from a distance, and they too walked up these steps. And it's Peter's journey here at this site that Christians remember. We're standing on the grounds of the Church of St. Peter in Gallicantu, the Church of St. Peter and the Cock Crowing. And I want to explore this church together with you and show you a little bit of what's here, and then to remember the story of Peter's greatest failure. It happened right here. First, however, I want to pause and pray as I'm walking up these steps, just silently, and remember that Christ also walked these steps, and that, like Peter, I often follow poorly in Christ's footsteps. So this building is built on an ancient archaeological site, believed to be the hall where the Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin, met that night when Christ was sentenced to die, and also an ancient prison. And the sanctuary tells the story of the last 24 hours of Jesus' life. Let's take a look. So this large hall, you can still see the original foundation stones, or really the stones around which this building was built, is thought to be perhaps the gathering place of the Sanhedrin, where Jesus was put on trial and where he was sentenced to die. Just outside of this room is the courtyard where Simon Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times. And so I think it's a great opportunity to look and just imagine the story when I bring people here. What's interesting is there is an opening in the floor here, so what looks like an old well. But as you approach it, you can see the hole goes all the way down into the pit in the bowels of the building. And underneath this section of the building, you find what appears to be an ancient prison, a place where prisoners were kept and shackled. And then beneath that, even still, is a pit, what might have been an ancient cistern, probably an ancient cistern, but which was used as a prison. And what happened was, in the ancient world, often these kind of openings, these kind of cisterns would be used as prisons when they were dry. And the prisoner would have ropes put around his chest and lowered down into the pit and then raised back up. So pilgrims come down here into the pit. These steps, of course, weren't here in the first century, but you come down here, and typically large groups gathering in here. And I've sat in the darkness sometimes in this room, and I've pondered the words that Jesus might have been thinking as he was hearing the Sanhedrin debating his fate above. I always pause. I invite people to just pause and remember, as they're here, the life experiences that we have when we're in the pit and we feel like life is hopeless. We've come down to the place where the church remembers, where Christians remember the moment of Peter's greatest failure. It was here in the courtyard of the high priest's house while Jesus was on trial and being sentenced, or about to be sentenced to death, that Simon Peter, warming himself by the fire, is asked by a stranger who's standing there, "You were one of Jesus' disciples too, weren't you?" And he cries out, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know the man." A second time, someone comes to him and says, "No, you were one of his disciples. We know you were." And he says, "I don't know him. I don't know what you're talking about." A third time, someone comes to him and says, "No, we know you were one of Jesus' disciples." And he begins to curse and swear and says, "I never knew the man." And at that moment, the cock crows. And one gospel tells us that Jesus' eyes, that Jesus looked through the opening, maybe the entrance to the high priest's house, to the courtyard, and his eyes met Peter's gaze, and Peter begins to weep unconsolably. Now, when the gospels were written, Simon Peter had already died. He was the hero of the church. He was the rock upon which the church was built, the leading apostle. How is it that all 4 of the gospels would tell the story? They don't want to embarrass Simon Peter. Nobody would do that. So why is this story recorded in all four Gospels? Why is it that across the church everyone knew the story? If it's not for the fact that Simon Peter must have told the story over and over and over again. Wherever he preached, he would have told the story. I denied the Lord. On the night that he was sentenced to die, I denied him 3 times. And yet he took me back. And if he took me back, he can take you back. and continue to work through you and use even your weakness as a testimony to his grace and mercy. This moment of Peter's greatest failure became the testimony that he gave across the world, I believe, to God's grace and mercy. And in it, it helped ordinary Christians who also would deny Jesus again and again and again to find hope. Each of us deny the Lord in our thoughts, in our words, in our deeds, by what we've done and by what we've left undone. And if there was hope for Simon Peter, there's hope for us as well. You may have denied the Lord. His grace is sufficient for you, and he will use you. And even the testimony about the moments of your weakness to help others understand who he is and the magnificence of his grace. Let's pray. Lord, you know how, like Peter, we often fail to understand. Sometimes we fall asleep when you need us to stay awake, and at moments by our words or our actions, we deny even knowing you. Please forgive us, Lord, right now. Make us clean and new once more, and help us to faithfully walk with you. In your holy name, amen.
So, my first question, what reactions to the video? And does it change, just seeing all that, seeing those places, does that change what you think about the last week? Simon Peter's life, what's his reactions? Anybody? No one?
It's sort of sobering, sort of, more than sort of.
Which part, Tom?
Just an emotional reaction to listening to him and seeing those areas. And when I first saw Adam in his bare feet, I thought, okay. But then when you see him actually walking up the stairs, that had power.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? When you just even look at the size, right? When you look at the size of just the rocks that it's built on, I mean, there's some kind of metaphor there too, isn't there? It's so sturdy, and it's so, one of Adam's questions is, the church remembers where the trial and where Jesus probably was and all that, but it also has this artwork outside, that talks about Peter's denial. So why do you think there's the focus on Peter's denial? I mean, we know why Adam Hamilton's focusing on it, but why do you think it's so important that we remember that? I mean, the church and everything that it's commemorating with its, with Jesus's trial is enough, isn't it? But maybe not, or obviously not.
I was struck just generally by how meaningful all the artwork was that you saw, just little bits and clips, the painting of Jesus washing the disciples' feet, all the churches that are built over these sites is to me that well, he talked about the three things that came out of that Jesus spoke about in the Last Supper, love each other, serve each other, and remember me, and how much all of those things, including the artwork and that sculpture at the church, are ways of, through the generations, remembering different, and how every generation has its different way of remembering. I thought at first, when I saw that for the Garden of Gethsemane, they were going into a church, I thought, oh no, stick with that pretty garden that we were looking at. But the artwork and the way that was done in that church with the stars in the sky and the branches that you could see, just thought was really added a lot. And we did the study last year, like 24, I think it was just last year, 24 Hours That Changed the World. Was that just last year, Jenny?
No,
2 years
ago.
2 years ago. And I remember that same scene of Adam Hamilton walking up those steps and talking about people in their bare feet and how impactful that was.
I'm struck with how most significant figures lift up their victories, and you see them as the conquering hero or the great orator or whatever. And what we've just seen is we remember if you will, the low points of Jesus' life as a human, of his
Peter's.
betrayal.
Peter's life, not Jesus.
Well, of both,
Oh, both.
both in a sense, that unlike, we do not commemorate a victory in what we saw today, particularly in these churches and so on, but the church over the ages has remembered the difficult times that Jesus came to die and be resurrected, and how difficult that was for the disciples to get it. They never really got that, and yet that's what we remember in this whole journey.
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, Ernie, because one of the things that Hamilton wants us to focus on is exactly that. Rather than have people read it, let me see if I can get to it really fast here. Let me pull it up. Where'd it go? Did I close it? That's so sad. I closed it. Hold on. Let me get it out. Scriptures. I'll read it for you. He says that, when Jesus is talking in Matthew 26, he says to them, "You will all become deserters because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered." And Peter says, "No, I will never desert you." And, there are 3 times in the scripture, well, no, so there more than that. Every time Jesus says, well, there are 3 times in one, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to die, I'm going to be resurrected. What do they say? And Ernie was just saying that they all say no, right? But no, that's not happening. So why do you think that is? I mean, they continue to deny that that's going to happen, even though he keeps telling them that it is.
And yet, after the resurrection, they did testify to him. They did speak. I mean, it's before and after. That was a transformative time. Just being with him for 3 years or whatever of his ministry, they still hadn't quite got through to them. They were easy to say, "You're the Messiah," but they were still thinking of the king who's going to come on his white horse. And
I also think it's easy to be in your head about that. I'm not denying it, but then when you really are there in the nitty gritty, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I don't want to get taken to prison. I don't want to die. I don't want to, so it's like, it's really hard. And I think so when you're theorizing about it, as they had been for all that time, and I agree with Ernie, that 3 years, that was, this wonderful time, but you're theorizing about all this. You're not really applying it. It's not the real deal. And that was the real deal.
Yeah. And he did keep trying to tell them, right? He did keep trying to tell them.
Yep.
Go ahead. Who's that? Somebody? Did I hear someone?
Well, don't you think that there's some of this was, just imagine how terrifying this whole experience was for them. And don't you think they were in denial? First, that Christ was going to leave them. Second, that all these awful things were going to happen. Then when all these awful things began to happen, they were terrified. This is not an age of human rights. They took Jesus and they put him in a hole in the floor, and he was going to die in a very excruciating way after being paraded before crowds that were going to berate him. I don't think Peter, as we said, once he was presented with that, Peter didn't want to go through that. Yet ultimately, if the stories are true, Nero was going to eventually do that to him anyway.
Right.
But it took him another lifetime of growing his faith to be able to go through that experience.
And that one of the things that's interesting about that too is now granted, these guys were fishermen, etc. So how educated were they? But as Jews, they know their history, right? And so you assume that some of this stuff they've heard in their scriptures. And he's like, Jesus is quoting exactly what was written, right? Like he's not actually telling them anything that they haven't heard or shouldn't have heard in one way or another. And yet they're still, you're right, like the terror and this, they're still denying it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they in theory knew some of this stuff. He quotes exactly from it and still, no. Who's that? Here's the-
There's another aspect to this, that as humans, even today, when we're faced with losing a loved one, someone very close to us, we want to deny that that's actually going to happen.
Yes, good.
Absolutely. Yeah, so there is an issue of how much you love someone, right? And how much you just can't. Yeah, right. There's that whole like that stages of grief, right? Yeah.
For them,
Yeah.
death was the end. For them, Christ's death, I think that's what they were seeing. If he dies, then it's the end of all of this,
Right.
because resurrection hadn't happened. And we still think that, death is the end, and it is of some things, but we get the resurrection to be able to give that next step. And they hadn't experienced that yet.
Yeah, our ability to look back changes things, doesn't it?
Right.
It's hard. Go ahead, Betsy, were you gonna?
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think Judy, you bring up a great point. The resurrection hadn't happened yet. So they didn't know what was going to happen. They were scared to death. And all they could think of is that, oh, the ride is over. The 3-year ride is over here. And we're all going to get it too, and I think Jenny and several other people who have been there, and they always take you to that particular place where that actually happens, where he was standing in that hole. And it's a very powerful spot, because you realize, first of all, you're low, there were no steps, so you're lowered into a cistern, and the reality is that you ain't getting out. So even if they forget about you for a few days or weeks, you're going to die in there. And that's very scary. It's a very frightening thing. I think the thing I was so in awe of too was the fact that right above that, where that the prison is, where those big hooks are hanging there, where they put the prisoners up and they were flogged. Oh my God, that was, and the disciples knew this. I mean, they knew this place. This is Caiaphas's house. They knew this place, and it was talk about the tomb of terror. Jeez. And so it was. I think that Judy brought up a good point. They were terrified. They didn't know what to do, and it's human nature that you deny something that's terrible that's going to happen. It's get me out of here. And I think that shows us how Jesus knew who we are. He knew that we were going to have trouble facing this, and he would be with us. That's what he tells us. He will be with us, and and then the resurrection, of course, is the proof of it all, I guess.
Okay, so then let's move to that other part of what he knew about us. So, in the ancient world, right? So you walk into somebody's house, and because you've got all the dirt on your feet, you're supposed to wash your feet. Like there's a bowl there, right? Like you're supposed to clean your feet when you walk into somebody's house. And if there isn't somebody to do it for you, you're supposed to do it. And yet, as he points out, nobody did it, right? They just walked by what was presumably there and went and sat down. So to Betsy's point, and to Adam's point, if they knew that was there, why did they not do it? So my point is the other part of human nature, right? Like, do they know it's coming? Like, they're not going to do that, because what if they have to wash somebody else's feet? Like, ew. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what part of human nature is that? We're going straight from fear and terror to, yeah, but I'm not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that.
Right.
Thoughts on that? Why did they walk by? Do you think that's why they walked by? What do you think they were thinking?
Well, the argument between James and John was over who is greatest. I mean, the hubris, the focus on themselves rather than serving others. I mean, for 3 years, Jesus had been said, I am come to serve. This is what he has modeled. And yet they get it into a fight over which of them's the greatest,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And who's going to sit where?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I
In the
want
middle of all this, by the way, can we talk about who's going to sit in your left hand and your right hand? Right? Yeah, we're worried and we're scared, but we're thinking about that too. Right? So spend some time there. So let's spend some time in the foot washing thing, because so everybody, what's your reaction to that? There's there's this serving of others, but let's talk about how in our culture, we don't, that's pretty nitty gritty, right? I mean,
I
we
think,
think, go
Patty,
ahead.
I think the thing here is that, he told them, love each other, right? Well, they got that because they were doing that. They did that for 3 years. They were showing, they were walking around with him and they were showing it to everybody and all that. And then he said, serve them. And they didn't get what that meant. They had no clue what that meant, that you had to get way down and low and be the least of the least to do that foot washing thing. And they didn't quite get that. That's I think why they walked by, because they felt that they were better than that. And hey man, we're the posse, we're the group, we're chosen, we got chosen. And so well, I'm not washing his feet, come on, cut me a break. And I think that was a great lesson to all of us, that we aren't any better than anybody else, and that is part of the commandment: serve everybody in any way. That was and Jesus showed him that, because he did it.
So
Yeah, I think they were expecting a servant to wash their feet. They're just waiting around for the house servant to come wash their feet.
Absolutely.
Carol, you were going to say something, yeah? Oh, you're muted, Carol. Carol, you're muted.
Usually I talk enough with my hands.
I was going to say, start again. Start again.
I've lost my thought. No, but what strikes me is the word humbling. Just really at the very bottom, you have to get down to the bottom and humble yourself to serve. And I don't know if others on the call, but I think some of you might remember on one Maundy Thursday service, John Lincoln had us in not actually wash feet, but we went through a motion of doing that sort of with a towel, but you had to kneel at the person's feet, shoes basically you were wiping. And I still remember doing that and the physical humbleness of it, So,
That's interesting.
yeah, I don't know if any of the others recall that service. I wasn't the only one there, I promise.
Well, I honestly wasn't there, but I did attend another service where we actually did wash feet.
Wow.
And what was that like?
Humbling, very humbling.
And so just out of curiosity, because I'm a trauma yoga instructor, where do you feel that? Like Carol, where do you feel that humbling? Well, how does that feel in your bodies?
It's in here. It starts in my neck. It goes down into my heart. It's digging and breathing too.
Yeah.
I think it's warm, or is it loose? Go ahead, Carol. Sorry.
Warm. Yeah, it's not cold, it's warm.
Pardon?
Carol, what were you going to say?
No,
you're good. Sorry, Carol. Go ahead. Carol.
When I think back about that, it was like physically consuming because I had to kneel below and, and wipe the feet. And then it was, we came forward to do it. So then someone did that to me and it was overwhelming, to see a person at my feet, very emotional, I can still recall it. Really, really touching.
And Carol, you feel the same way, obviously, right? So I'm pointing.
Yes, absolutely.
That's amazing. Okay, so other people who have experiences like Jane, what were you? Oh, Betsy, Jane.
No, I was just going to say that I think the disciples were still anticipating this idea of a Messiah king that was going to overcome with power. Just the idea that Peter draws the sword at the time of the arrest, and they're debating who's gonna kind of be this second general in charge when our revolution finally takes hold, and so I think that was still in their heads, that this is what it was going to look like, and all of a sudden Jesus totally flips that for them in terms of this idea of servanthood. and how powerful that must have been. I remember participating in a foot washing that wasn't a full foot washing. It was just with a towel and so forth. And actually being the person whose foot was being washed, I found that probably the more difficult part of it. It was easier for me to wash somebody else's feet than to allow somebody else to wash my feet. I don't quite know why, but that was the more difficult part.
We did one
Same experience too, and I've done this with groups, and there are people who will wash someone's feet, but they won't let somebody wash their feet, that
We did, David and I used to do on retreats with kids. We used to do this a lot because it's so powerful. It's such a powerful thing. And I can remember pretty clearly, we would set up like sort of cookie sheets or something with tempera paint and have the kids take their shoes off, and they had to step in the paint and walk down a long banner of paper. And then at the end, there was a seat with a bowl to wash the feet. And so they thought, this was a fun time, walk down with this paint on your feet and walk down. But then they got to the end and their feet were washed. And then they had to wash the next guys, so that was pretty strong. But then the cool part was, because that's kind of how, the journey of the 3 years was pretty cool and fun and full of color. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's the end, and it's pretty sudden. And then what we would do is we would hang that banner for the service the next day. And I'm telling you what, and those kids would just, whoa, because it made it really clear about, the idea of this wonderful gift, and then this tremendous servitude that was expected also out of what the love was. That was part of the love, it was just, it was really powerful.
Okay, I have an idea. I'm shooting straight from hip here. Does anybody else have anything to say right this second? Can I? If not, I have an experiment.
Go.
Or, can we do it?
Go.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So I just want everybody. I'm gonna set a timer. I want everybody. Here we go. Okay, ready? I want everybody to spend just 1 minute. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think about being the receiver of the foot washing. All right. I'll time it. Just go into that for a sec. Imagine yourself sitting, someone's kneeling at your feet, and they're washing them. Okay, so stay there for just another couple of seconds. We're going to come out of it. Just stay for a second, finish it up. Okay. Okay. So reactions. Somebody else that hasn't had it actually happen.
I'm definitely exposing some warts.
Okay. Metaphorically. Anybody? Did anybody feel that in their bodies? Did anybody feel, how do you feel? Be
I
brave.
think a little humbled, grateful. Those were the things that came to mind for me.
Okay, anybody else?
I think, Patty, I'd rather be the washer than the one who received the washing, feeling better about giving than receiving. which I think is often the way with a lot of us.
I agree. I agree. Anybody else? Can anybody got Joan?
I was thinking about the vulnerability that it takes to receive from people. You have to humble yourself to do that, and you have to stop thinking about what they might think about you, what my feet look like. You know, it's sort of like cleaning your house before the housekeepers come, you know, so that
Guilty.
you're not judged. Right?
I've had the experience with my mother, who's 91, and sometimes she'll allow me to help her put on her socks. And I know how humbling that is for her, and how she has to trust me that I won't tease her or think less of her or whatever. And so for me, that's such a blessing.
I can see that, Jane. I can see that.
Mhm.
And do you have to think about how to do that for your mom for your mother, so she feels okay about it? Is that something you consider when you're doing that?
Definitely. Just try to encourage her and, say, Mom, let me help you. It's okay. It's, that's why I'm here.
Right. So, because where I'm going with this, I wasn't sure if I knew where I was going, but I am.
Well,
Go ahead. Betsy, were you going to say something?
Another piece is a lot of people don't like their feet being touched. I don't know how many of you have that thing. A lot of people don't like their feet being touched. They'll say, "Oh, I could never get a pedicure because I don't like people touching my feet." And that,
because it tickles.
Well, you can ask them to not do that part. But anyway, a lot of people have a real thing about their feet. So to allow somebody to see, you can see your hands, right? You can see your face and see your arm, but to allow somebody to see maybe one of the more intimate parts of you is not something that people would like to reveal. So it is very humbling. And it's also, makes you very vulnerable, at the same time. And it's a very metaphorical thing. And of course it was a very practical thing back in the day, because those folks were all walking around in sandals and a bunch of dirt. And so it was important that they do keep their feet clean. But, for us today, we cover our feet, and people who are, quote, ashamed of their feet or have a thing about their feet, a lot of times will keep closed toe shoes on even in the summer because they don't want people to see them. They don't want to be revealed. So I think that's a part of this thing, part of how that is. And then the only other thing, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, but the only other thing I was thinking is I always have found, I always wind up wrapping my Christmas gifts in the middle of the night, after church at the midnight mass. And I always be wrapping with the Pope always. And one of the things I always loved was the fact that the Pope would do the foot washing. I always loved that because they take like people from prison and stuff and they wash. Here's the Pope of the Catholic Church and he's washing the feet of all these folks. And I just always have found that so spiritual to happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, what I want to do is flip this thing. I want us to, if we can, I agree, Betsy, totally. I want to go back maybe to Jane's. So when we talk about servant leadership, it strikes me that, we talk about how low do we have to, what does that mean? Like how deep are we going? But I don't often hear a lot of discussion about how to do it with recognition of how the other person we're doing it to feels. Mm-hmm. And that's my point about like Jane's mom, and my mother's the same. She's 88 and she hates being helped, even though she needs it. And we assume, I'm wondering about this other piece of servant leadership. We assume, okay, well, we're willing to do the nitty gritty. We're willing to go down in the dirt. Okay, cool. But what does the other person we're trying to help feel?
Mm-hmm.
And do they feel like we felt for that minute and a half when we're trying to, we don't want to, and why you don't want to. So can we talk about like how realizing what the person we're trying to help, we think we're doing something good. How do we do servant leadership with that other person's feelings in mind?
Right.
Can we talk about that a little? Like, how do you think that changes? Like, everybody just wants to barrel in and help, right? Maybe.
I think you have to hold in your heart compassion and a sense of non-judgment. And an understanding of what that other person's feeling.
And you have to recognize the gift they're giving you by allowing you to do it. That's
because
huge.
what it must take, right? Like, what must it take?
Right.
Like, picture a single mother with 2 kids, right? I don't know, her husband's beaten her, she ends up at home with a sparrow, but what must it take for her,
Exactly.
who's trying to survive, to have somebody come and give her clothes so she can do an interview, or give her, like, what must that take, right?
Absolutely.
I think if the person receiving requires trust, because when I was going through that imagery with you, I was thinking, I think I could let Jesus wash my feet because I would trust him. But there's some people that I might not trust enough to allow them to wash my feet.
And what do you trust? Like, what do you trust of Jesus? Like, what do you trust Jesus to do or not to do or think? Or
I guess that I would believe that he was doing it out of a sense of love and not judging what my feet look like or feel like or whatever.
Pat, you
I
asked.
also wonder if there's a cultural piece to this too, in terms of our feelings about feet versus their feelings about their feet per se.
Yeah.
They were probably much more used to having their feet washed and more exposed than we are.
Right.
So I think there's this whole piece of the master doing it as a servant that I think we sometimes miss in our own experience of foot washing.
Right.
I think that this touches upon the whole topic of leadership. And I did go to the website and look at that. I've had an interest my whole career in leadership, and many of the references that they use are leadership gurus from way back. Steve Covey. So it's not as if this is a new concept. I think it's true that when you asked a great question when you said, how do people feel? Because some people, when they look at, when they want to be led, they don't want to be served. And so I think there is an element of people who really just want the answers. Take me to success. Don't serve me.
Right.
And I think it's a kind of a dilemma, because I think good leaders everywhere do serve. And I've seen leaders who are unwilling to serve.
Right.
But certainly come in with thinking they have all the answers and you just follow me.
Right.
It's a great discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Because Paul, that's a good point. There are so many kinds of serving, right? And so many kinds of leadership. And we're obviously talking about, this type, but anybody respond to Paul's comments about this kind of, what does it mean?
Patty,
yeah.
When we train people who have been called to Stephen Ministry, we spend an entire session on the difference between servitude and servanthood. And in servanthood, you are serving, God is with you, and you're not being aggressive. You're doing his work, you are his hands. And so therefore you feel as though it's not you who's washing the feet, but perhaps it's Christ.
That's so cool. Reactions to what Marian said? Yeah. It's really an interesting topic. So, So, okay, yeah, actually, does anybody have any thoughts on that? Is it easier to give or to receive if you remember that you're Christ's hands, you're Christ's feet? How does that change the picture if you think of it that way and take yourself out of it?
I am a Stephen minister, and I couldn't do it if I didn't think it was really God there, almost in the spirit, with the two of us meeting. But I'd like to turn the conversation back to the receiver. I think we have a big problem, most of us, with this, and we should work on it a little bit. Giving people the opportunity to help us, asking for help. This is a huge thing. And don't be so hard-hearted that you can't ask. I mean, I'm not talking about the mother that needs you. I'm talking about you in your time of life when you really can do things, but you still need people once in a while. Ask them for the help you need.
I agree. And I agree that, and I also think, Gabrielle, that once you do it, it becomes easier. There's this, I mean, if you'll indulge me for 1 minute, I had postpartum depression. I'm a control person. I'm type 1, I'm type A, whichever Enneagram you're following. And I had this postpartum depression with my 4th child. And and my brother-in-law, who's a surgeon, knew it and came up to me one day at a giant event and said, "Give me the baby." No, give it. And he said, "Give me the baby." And I just turned her over. And it changed everything in my life. Because since then, when I've needed to be helped, I've asked. He wanted to help me. He could help me. Of course I could do it myself if I had to stand there and do it. He wanted to help me. And I let him. And it changed everything. Sometimes I think I asked for help too much, but that's beside the point. Maybe I got too over it. But it was an amazing freedom to say he wanted to help, and I wasn't going to ask him. And you're right, Gabrielle, you ask people. Yeah. Somebody was saying something. I thought I heard somebody. No. Anybody else have an issue, anything to say about asking? Betsy.
Well, we used to do work camps with the kids, right? And we would go to these different places. We went to Appalachia a couple times, and we actually did one in Chester once upon a time too, that was the urban work camp. That was a whole different ballgame. But the couple ones that we went to, you take these kids to this interdenominational work camp, and there were kids from all over the country. I mean, kids from Michigan and Minnesota and Connecticut and Texas and all these kids. And then they would break you into groups, and you would go out, and these people had been identified through whatever agencies in the community who needed help, right? And you would work on these projects, and they would give you a list of things that you had to do. And you had eight people, 1 adult and 7 kids. And you had a list of jobs you had to do and protocol and so on. And when I first got in there, you're really freaked out because you don't know the people and the people don't know you. And they've got say they have to have windows glazed or concrete poured or something like that. And you know how to do this, but it's their house. So it's kind of weird. And then that was say Monday, but by Friday, these kids, and these were Newtown Square main line kids, okay, who had everything. They had more than everything. And these people who had nothing, literally in Sunbright, Tennessee, had nothing. By the end of the week, the people that we came to work on their house, their dirt was now those kids' dirt, okay? And the fact that they could open themselves, the Sunbright, Tennessee people could open themselves up and allow these kids to help them. And not really, it was an amazing transformation of things that took place in people's lives, not just from the people that got the concrete poured, but the kids that did the work. And then that whole thing was just an amazing experience I'm still talking here. I'm an adult and I'm still talking about it, but the kids, it was amazing. And that idea of that giving, but recognizing the vulnerability of those people to give you that control, like you're talking about giving the baby to your brother-in-law, giving that control to us was just, you learned how to respect that and to really be amazed at the vulnerability that you were included in. It's powerful.
And I've heard versions of that, Betsy. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
I was thinking about what Peter did when he said to Christ, not just my feet, but my whole body. And just trying, trying to think that through. And Christ saying to him, if you don't, your feet is enough. I mean, I think he sort of just said it in that way, but I've heard it like that, doing it, saying to him, my whole body. I mean, Christ wanted him to recognize that not allowing ourselves to be vulnerable was sin. We we're asked to be part of each other's lives. And in order to do that, we have to be vulnerable. And I was thinking about, Jenny, I was thinking about your sermon this morning about it all being about love. We cannot love each other with gritted teeth. We can't fake that. And being, allowing ourselves to show ourselves to others is just, it's just everything. And we can, we step out and we do it, and we think we're going to do it with people who are going to be safe. We're not always going to find safe people. But we have to be open, we have to be vulnerable, we have to say what our needs are.
Right.
And
Agree.
I don't know where else to go with that, but that's,
Well, if you take it back to Hamilton, right, the idea is, Peter's flawed, right? We have a hard time doing that. Tough. We have to do it anyway, right? I think that's his whole point, right? Is that we are like Peter, and in this particular case, we don't want to do that. We want to be tough guys, but we are called to be vulnerable so that we can love as Jesus did, right?
But I go back to the again and again, of God's love. So yeah, we blow it sometimes. Sometimes we blow it again and again, but there's still another opportunity given to us.
That's right.
Right.
Differently. And
then there's that side of being the foot washer rather than the receiver. I mean, this might sound funny to say, but in our family, we have beautiful feet. And we have even my siblings over, my brother and my sister over time, we would like take pictures of our 3 feet together. I'm not opposed to feet at all. I love feet. But in this conversation, I think about, I could certainly wash any of your feet. Trust me, I could wash any of your feet. I could help you out. But how I would then feel about being, I can wash anybody's feet. That is not what we're talking about,
No.
And yeah.
Well, and the whole idea of the person who usually washed the feet was the servant, was the lowest guy in the house. So, you're putting yourself in that position. Christ put himself in that position to be the lowest of the low. Because that didn't take a whole lot of, skill sets to be able to wash feet. And so you were, that's where he put himself. And that is a great example to us that even, just doing little humble things that's what we're supposed to do. That's what we're called to do.
Right. But I think when you come into any experience feeling as though you can do these things, but if you're doing them in your own strength, you are not serving. If you're going into a place of people being vulnerable, going to a food bank, and you feel proud to go in there and serve them, you're not doing it with Christ at the center. You have to have the sensitivity that Jane was talking about with her mother. You have to have that. You have to have that component. You have to go in with the Holy Spirit working through you to help people and have it really be real.
Well, it's a lesson in when we serve, we have to also be willing to be served. It we give gift, we receive gift. There's the servant song is a hymn in our hymnal that churches I've been in, where when we dedicated our Stephen ministers, we will sing that. But it's let me be a servant. Let me be a servant. I can't remember all the, but the idea is let me be a servant to you, and I'll let you be my servant too. You know, which is just a lovely.
And doesn't this just all come back to this idea of being vulnerable? Doesn't it sort of full circle back to the author's description of why Peter's denial of Christ was so very well known, that he must have admitted in his preaching his vulnerability and what he did, and then Christ's forgiveness. And it made me start to think about, you know, over the years, how does admitting your vulnerability, when you talked about your postpartum depression, Patty, for such a long time that was such a hidden thing, but then mothers started talking about it and admitting to it, and in that way so many more mothers who have suffered that have been helped.
Exactly.
And it's that whole idea of there are so many examples of people who have been willing to admit their weakness, their vulnerability, and from then on actually get to be able to become a help to other people because of it. Right. But at first it takes admitting the weakness.
Right. I think you're right. I think Peter probably did. He probably did preach it, right? So that's why we have to remember it and why we focus on it. Yeah. I am, once again, I'm looking to the right. I'm looking at my clock. It's 12:37. We've done it again. And I could go on forever, but I don't want to do that for people. Just we could keep going, but we shouldn't. Does anybody have anything else they want to add? Thank you. Thank you all for starters. Thank you. Anybody? I'll close with a prayer if not. I didn't mean to cut it off, but I know people have things to do. I thought this was a great discussion. Judy, we can stay on afterwards. Clearly, the outline, I didn't follow at all, but there you go. I'll close with prayer. We can go from there. Thank you all very much. All right, let's see. I like to, so I'll use this. Lord, let us be your servants by serving others. As our guide, let us remember the way you humbly washed your servants' feet. Let us remember what it felt like to be served. Grant us the faith and the courage, in spite of our failings and our denials, and our fear and our vulnerability, to follow you wherever you call us to go. In Jesus' name, amen.
Where do we go from here? What's the next journey class?
We still have 2 more of this.
Yeah, we have two more weeks of this.
Oh, good. Never mind then.
All right, I'll tell you what we're getting down.
Never mind then.
I'll tell you next week. I'm teaching next week. I'll tell you next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay on, okay?
Thank you.
Bye.
On to the players' final golf match. Something to look forward to.
Oh, Jane, I like your candle.
It's a great conversation, these are. Oh my.
Oh, I'm glad you guys liked it. Yeah. Tom, I'm going to say this in front of you. Did you all notice that it was the women who spoke? Tom heard it. You can pass that on. It was the women who were more comfortable. Did you notice?
Are you asking Tom? Because
no, because I know you guys are all still here, so I'm just saying.
In general, yes.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard thing. Yeah, but yeah, thanks very much. Thank you. Judy, I'll show you how to do that. If you hang on for a sec, I'll show you how to, I'll walk you through some of this, okay? Judy, I'm just going to do a little
Thanks.
stuff.
Thanks, Patty.
For sharing. Thank you. Bye, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Sandy. Bye, Karen. All right. So Judy's still a co-host or something or other, right? Yeah.
I'm not. I'm
No.
just. I think.
You should have. Jen, you gave her. You gave her.
No, I didn't. So let me.
Okay. You give her something so that she can share whatever she needs to become.
Yeah, let me make her a co-host. Whoops.
So Judy, do you know what, are you using Chrome? Do you know what you're using to get into everything? Do you use Chrome?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good, good, good. So do you have the picture of us, your full screen right now, or can you make it, can you make it smaller? Do you know how to make it just a little smaller and stay on?
It's, let's see.
So if you put this, if you push your escape key, we'll get smaller and you'll be able to see a little bit more of your screen.
Okay, where's
Top
my?
left, it should be. So around your top left somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Hit escape.
Just push it?
Just push escape.
Okay.
And now you might have gotten like, we might have become a little bit less of your whole screen.
You're right about 2/3 of my whole screen now.
Okay, good. Okay, excellent. So up top across the, so are we low so you can see something else on top of your screen?
Now, unfortunately, I can't see anything. Can
Okay,
I?
that's okay. So
Can
if
I
we're
move you
small,
down somehow?
you can move me down. Just click, if you put
There
your
you go.
cursor-
I'm moving you down. Woohoo!
Woohoo! Okay, just
Woohoo, okay.
Yay!
That in itself is victory.
Okay, so up top,
Mm-hmm.
you have what are called little tabs. Do you see your little, do you have a little tab there? There might be something that says new. Up top, there's maybe a little plus sign that you could click new on. Do you see that?
I see a show apps
Okay, hold on.
kind of thing, live stream, AOL mail. I don't see anything.
Okay, you know what you see your
That's it.
AOL mail? You told me to send you told me to send that to Verizon. You
Well,
said-
that's my email at verizon.net, but I get it through AOL mail.
Okay, you know what? I want you to open up your AOL and I want you to get the email I sent you.
Okay,
Can
so
you
I'm
do that?
gonna click on that.
Mhm.
All right.
I'm going to show Judy how to share screens, Jay. Are you okay being here,
Okay.
Jay? Are you
Should I open the document?
Yes, you should
Okay.
open the document, definitely.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, good. So you have it. Do you know how to save? Do you know how to save that document? It's okay, I'll tell you.
Yeah, tell me how, because
Okay.
this is.
All right, so you're looking at a document. You have it open, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the very top of the document, do you see something on the top left called File?
Yes.
Click it.
Oh, okay.
Click it.
And then click on save.
Correct. But if
Okay,
you
good.
click on Save, it's going to want to know where you want to save it. So there should be something below Save that says Save As.
Save as. Okay.
Click it.
I've
walk you through
clicked.
Okay.
Well,
So-
I've clicked on it. Nothing happened so far.
Okay. So what it really, you know what? If you just save it, it'll go to your desktop. So if you just
That's,
click on
that's
Save,
right. Okay, I'm going to click on save. Now,
Okay,
see,
click on-
yeah, there. Oh, saving is disabled in protected view. I can enable saving, correct?
you can. If you go up top on the document, it'll say Enable something, right? You can just hit
Yeah.
Enable. And now you
Okay.
can play with it.
Okay,
save
so
it.
now I'm going to go back to file and I'm going to save.
There you go.
Okay,
And so now it's on
Maybe
your
I-
desktop.
let's see if I can now do save as. Now it's going to let me do save as.
Oh, good. But do you
Okay.
keep files in on your computer in particular areas or anything? Or do
I
you just
keep
go-
well, I have some files, but I keep a lot on the desktop.
Okay, then
so-
just leave it on the desktop. You're fine. For our purposes, you're fine.
Okay,
So when you, on Tuesday, if you wanted to share a document, what you wanted to do is open it. So you have it open right now,
yes.
right? Okay. All right, so just leave it there. Just leave it there. Do you have anything else that's open right now besides that document and us?
I don't think so.
Okay. So on Tuesday, I would tell you, first of all, to just have whatever you want to be sharing open and us. Okay. Don't make sure nothing else is open on your desktop. I'm presuming you don't do a lot of, you wouldn't have 25 files open, right?
No.
Good.
No.
Nobody should. But just have that document open, okay? Or whatever you want to do. All right, so
Okay.
go back to, now you're going to go back to our little Zoom meeting here.
Okay, so how do I get back to that?
So just click on it. You should, down below on the bottom of your screen, do you see a little the little icons?
Yeah.
There's going to be a little it's going to be a blue circle with a little, what's supposed to be a video camera in it.
Oh, okay. Oh.
There we are.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so always go along the bottom and there's going to be a little icon along the bottom somewhere that you can click on that'll, whatever it is you want to do, whether you wanted to make a Word document or get back into
Yeah.
Zoom. Okay,
Yeah.
so here we are.
So I got you back.
Okay, now
Okay.
go along the bottom of the screen that we're on. And you should see like mute will be on your left, where all those things are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's going to be a green button that says share screen.
Your screen, right.
Hit it.
Okay.
And what's going to happen is you're going to get a screen that's going to open up that's actually going to show you anything that you can share. And that document should be one of them.
Oh, okay. Oh, it is. It's right there.
Of course it is. Click it.
Look at that.
Look at
Can
that.
you see? Who knew?
Okay. And then if you look at the top of the document that you're sharing right now, it's
Yeah.
going to say you're sharing, and then there's going to be a red button that says stop sharing.
Okay.
Hit stop sharing. There it goes.
All right.
Do it again. Do it again.
Yeah, exactly. Because, okay, so when I'm,
Go along the bottom. So make sure so before your meeting on Tuesday, have open what it is you know you want to share.
if I
So
want,
yeah.
right.
And I will send you my outline if you want, Judy, but it's useless if you do what I did.
I think I'm gonna be fine, because I mean, I've led a lot of groups. This is a piece of it that I thought, oh, it would be so much easier if we could be writing this stuff on the whiteboard at
Yes,
the
that is
church.
easier. No, you're absolutely right.
So I'm sharing screen, and then I'm gonna go to this document.
Open it.
And then they see it, and then when I'm ready to finish, I just do stop share.
Exactly.
All right.
It's super easy.
Might have to come up with something, put something on there just to do that.
Yeah, you can have something
Thank
fun on
you.
there. Yeah, absolutely. So
Thank
that's all.
you.
Just make sure it's open ahead of time, because if it's not, it won't come up as an option for you to share.
Okay.
So
So
you just
if
have to
it's
make
on
sure
my
it's-
desktop, I have to open it and let it open, then go back to whatever I was doing.
Correct.
Okay.
Because you know the Zoom is like looking for what you might want to share, but if it's not already
Right.
open, it can't find it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
welcome.
very much. Appreciate that. Is Sandy Linick, are you still there?
This was weird. I didn't know if Sandy was there at all, because she's just kind
Yeah.
of. Maybe she walked away.
Yeah, she often is on like that, but I don't know if I'm not sure if she's there or.
I'm hoping, because she's part of our Tuesday group, so hopefully she'll be there Tuesday.
But so anyway, Judy, throw that document I sent out if you don't want people to read. But if you wanted other people to read the scriptures, if you're gonna
Read,
use
that
them,
makes it easy rather than saying, you know, have your Bibles handy. Okay.